So it is my absolute pleasure to be introducing the wonderful John Hess, Ph.D. If you were lucky enough to see his last presentation with us, it is outstanding. If you didn't see it, I really suggest going onto our YouTube channel and checking it out. It is one of my personal favorites. John Hess is an author, a photographer. He is a professor emeritus at the University of Central Missouri. I probably didn't pronounce that right. I actually had to look up what emeritus meant. It meant that he's retired. He taught evolutionary biology for 30 plus years, and this sounds like it's going to be a great presentation, so I'm going to let him just come up and do his thing. So, John?
How are we? Excellent. It's always a pleasure to be here, even though this is echoing back to me a little bit strong, maybe. And when I get here, it's an unusual place. Everybody's happy, seems like, and that's just great. I first came to Oasis a couple of years ago, wondering what an unchurch would be like. The speaker was Mike Ouse. Everybody knows him, right? He spoke of the building of community and the sharing of joy in many forms as of prime importance in these gatherings. Now we're going to see if technology works, and it does. That's a miracle. So my talk started back then, really. And it ended, well, it hasn't ended yet, but Helen's reference to what makes me feel alive, that'd be a good title for this presentation that I have in mind for you today. The title is Sharing the Joy. Of course, there are lots of kinds of joy, some superficial and red hot, others quiet and warm, and that's where I'm going today. We all wear lots of different hats, as the occasion demands. Some are entirely ridiculous and reserved for special occasions. Some are reserved for special people. And we're not there yet. I'm not following my... There we go. Special people. Some are so plain, and we wear them so consistently that they're not really hats at all any longer. They just fit who we are. Today, I'm a scientist, naturalist, photographer, hoping to share the joy, and to do it by examining the tiny bits that make up the big picture, and to gather them into a coherent image. I see that Oasis has been up to its ears in social issues. There are so many of them that consume our interests and arouse our fears that it's easy to get lost in all of the frightening news. But we can't talk about that endlessly. We need some balance. I'll bet even Job and Jeremiah marveled at the beauty of flowers on occasion. So even though incredibly serious issues demand our attention, we can serve ourselves and everyone else by taking a little time off to wallow in the joys we have right now, figuratively to smell the roses and to reach for the center. A few years ago, I did a book on the Galapagos Islands, a coffee table book of photographs and text. I'm not here to sell books, but there are some in the back. Just recently, I've been surprised to discover what my book is about. You'd thought I would have had a good idea already. But the book I wrote, the one I like to think of as the good book, turns out it's not so much about the Galapagos as it is about building relationships between people and the mantle of living things draped over the landscape. The mantle I called Darwin's tapestry. The Galapagos archipelago was only the case in point. Now, I'm deep into a second book, but this time the place is totally ordinary. It's a 30-acre patch of rural Missouri on Brawley Creek. It's where we live. Oddly, it's going to be the same book. For both books, the process involves meeting the characters, seeing what is extraordinary about them, and getting a glimmer of how all these characters interact. You might be thinking that the Galapagos, sitting there in the equator, is not very ordinary, but it is for the Galapagos. Now, for them, possum, that would be wildly exotic. The fact is, there is plenty right around here that is exotic because so much of it is entirely foreign to us. Take a look at this familiar weed. Familiar weed. Familiar weed. Georgia O'Keeffe, commenting on her very large paintings of flowers, said, "When you take a flower in your hand and really look at it, it's your world for the moment. I want to give that world to someone else. Most people in the city rush around, so they have no time to look at a flower." Then she goes on, "I want them to see it whether they want to or not." My sentiments exactly. Here's a different flower. This one will make a thimbleberry by the time its work is finished. I want you to really look at it. Make it your world for the moment. You have to focus on it. I mean, it's like meditation. It won't work if your mind is off building a grocery list. Take in the whole of the image. Let your eyes wander over the shapes and feel the textures. Walk the trails with your eyes laid out by the geography of the flower. Those trails have been laid out to direct bees, but they work for us as well. Awe comes to us in a variety of ways, often as part of a spiritual experience. We encounter a powerful sense of it standing beneath the vastness of a night sky. That is our world for that moment. Awe is available to us in many sizes. We can be in awe of the beauty and complexity of every part of the biological community, even the tiniest components. This hummingbird is tiny, but like us, he is a virtual ecosystem by himself, with all the organisms that live on him and in him and around him. His requirements are satisfied totally by the community, as are ours, so consistently that we rarely notice, from our swaddling clothes to our ashes. Today, I'd like to notice and to take pleasure in it. There's a second source of pleasure that's really part of the same package. I'd like to recognize the power of belonging. In Maslow's hierarchy, the need to belong ranks third only behind the satisfaction of our physiological demands and the need to feel safe. Belonging yields a deep and innate joy. It's a craving that fits hand in glove with our evolution as a social species. This family in red radiates well-being, warmth, and acceptance. I have no idea who these people are, but I wish I did. It's a masterful collection of symbols, right down to the shared red jammies and the delivery guy who wandered in and has been given a cup of coffee and a bagel. It's wonderful. This need to belong is our natural state. Family is primary, of course, but we belong to groups of like mind at many levels. Bowling leagues, Rotary Club, Oasis. Sometimes we wave flags, we dress with team colors to assure that everybody knows what group we belong to. And sometimes, perhaps, we relax our natural reserve too much. Too much. There we go. Now that's too much. The belonging I have in mind is broader and deeper and highly inclusive. Our ancestors once carried this sense of being. It's our birthright, but it's been lost for the most part. Most people in the city rush around so. Somehow, long ago, we decided that we are just below the gods, and therefore superior to, well, everybody else. The idea was formalized by Aristotle as the ladder of life. It was really an attempt at taxonomy, starting from the most complex down to the lower forms that he imagined were less complex. His ladder of life fit well into the Judeo-Christian framework, and by the time a millennium had passed, it was deeply embedded, with some tweaks, in Christian theology as the great chain of being. Now, I'm sure you can't make out very much of that, but I'll throw in some colors and it will help. It explains the hierarchy of all creation, the pecking order, as it turns out. At the top, perfection, God. Humans are just below the angels. I'm not sure how we let that one get by us. We really should have placed ourselves above the angels, but we didn't. Everything else is lower, less perfect, closer by innuendo to the underworld. Here's a contemporary version. It's lost its goth and assumed a corporate-like structure. Ecologists find pyramidal relationships throughout communities, and we find that they carry very powerful overtones. Our culture, however, in spite of this pyramid, still carries the chain of being inside of our schizoid selves. And it's a part of our entitlement. It's entirely compatible with our master of the world delusion that has us as the CEOs of corporate Earth. And we really need to make it turn a profit this quarter. Here's what all this has to do with belonging. We alienate ourselves from the community of life with this bit of puffery. We judge them as lower beings because we evaluate them by our standards. We need to embrace a model more like this one. It disappeared again. I think my thumb is too fat. This rests on a few uncontested facts and on common sense. Here are some of facts. Every living thing is the latest edition of an unbroken chain of successful ancestors, and each chain ultimately connects to the single original link in the far distant past. Now that is a great chain of being. Therefore, all of us species, every one of us, evolved successfully along our own unique track and can trace our lineage back to that same ancestor, way back then. And now, here we all are. We're all living at the finish line. We all look different. We all act differently. In all that time, we've built extravagant interdependencies, communities. Just having survived at all makes us winners. All of us are gold medalists in our own Olympic events. Now let's get specific. I'm proud to introduce you to a distant cousin whose extraordinary capabilities make us all safe. He is a gold medalist. The name is Cathartic aura. It's a scientific name that translates purifying breeze. His Olympic event is vertebrate corpse detoxification and removal. There are a lot of events in these games, and you might want to stay upwind of that pavilion. It's a turkey vulture. Now maybe this isn't the best place to start, but then again maybe it is. It's not a pretty face by human standards. He's said to have a head that looks like a discarded wad of bubble gum. It does. But then human standards are irrelevant to non-humans. So there's no benefit for him in pleasing us. They serve the community of life well, so well that we are unaware of it. The fact that we find their work repulsive makes their performance not one whit less excellent. Their role is to eat truly awful things by our standards. Things that are laced with deadly bacteria and their toxins, besides the toxins of decomposition. Sometimes the entree has died of disease, anthrax, hantavirus, botulism. They seek out these assignments with great skill, and you'd have to suppose that they relish it with an intensity we reserve for barbecue. And they dispose of it all, for all of us, by enveloping it. They kill the bacteria, dismember the toxins, and leave harmless droppings that are essentially free of all pathogens. A turkey vulture injected with a dose of botulism, a poison strong enough to kill 300,000 guinea pigs, was unfazed. This is awesome. One of their peculiar but not unique adaptations is that they defecate on their feet. We feel that that's unattractive. But for them, it's like a bit of foot washing. The uric acid kills the bacteria from the rotting flesh they've been walking on, and its subsequent evaporation cools them. They think of it as a kind of pedicure. I've always been enamored with humor in the style of Gary Larson, the mixing human and non-human behaviors among humans and non-humans. And I found this salvo by an anonymous writer protesting the different standards we allow for animals. Oh, sure, he says. When a vulture craps on itself, it's to sterilize themselves and to cool themselves down. But when I do it, I'm way too drunk and not supposed to do that in the dairy aisle. We can't approach a vulture's level of excellence, nor would we want to. We're nowhere close. A little day-old potato salad and we're down for the count. He looks more attractive all the time, doesn't he? Still not beautiful, but beauty is only skin deep, carries a certain resonance. Quite a strong profile, don't you think? Maybe Washingtonian? Maybe we should look at something more attractive. Someone more like us. Here we go. It's not that we're narcissistic, especially. It's just that evolution has shaped us to take pleasure in things that give us positive sensations. Most often those relate to human interactions. We emote and respond to those signals, especially those from infants. We're attracted to chipmunks more than vultures because they're cute. And that's because they have physical structures and behavioral signals that please us. It's easier to empathize with this chipmunk, another cousin who is doing what she has to do to promote her family and her kind, just like we do. She's very different from us, vastly different from us, but she can suffer, she can get hungry, mate, nurse infants, and care for them driven by hormonally mediated behaviors, just like us. She can get angry. Now, it's hard to say what that feels like inside of a chipmunk, but since they release the same hormones and the same neurotransmitters from the same locations as we do, it's really hard to imagine that it feels much different than what we experience. With all the just like us commentary, it's easy to fail to hear the other half, that they are vastly different from us. So I need to make it clear that I'm not proposing a Disney-like scenario where the mice sing songs as they sew up Cinderella's gown. And I'm not advocating a Dr. Dolittle thing. I mean, I don't talk to animals. Go on. Yeah. And I don't think of them as my friends. I expect this chipmunk to exhibit her nature as I do mine. I expect her to be distrusting of me and to bite me if I pick her up. We're equals in our evolutionary success, and by following our different natures, we got to be the way we are. If I'm foolish enough to pick her up, she's properly wired to teach me not to do that. It's all the more reason to admire them and take pride in their unique abilities. For instance, they can dig an underground house with these tiny fingers and hibernate. They too are medalists. In spite of their bright eyes and infantile appeal, they are strong competitors in the super featherweight class at the peanut stuffing pavilion. The fact is that all of us are at the pinnacle of our adaptedness. There are no lower animals. Take a look at this scissor-tailed flycatcher. Whoops, that's not a scissor-tailed flycatcher. Where's my scissor-tailed flycatcher? Oh, you should see the scissor-tailed flycatcher. There he is. He's out of order. I'll speak to him afterwards, although I don't speak to animals. Look at this scissor-tail. This image suggests that, just possibly, they should be promoted to just below the angels and maybe take our place. Here, he is stopped for an instant. Again, take a moment. Imagine the elements of wing and tail structure imbued with life and grace and with beauty and with effortless control. Imagine what it might feel like to fly like this, to weigh almost nothing, and to feel the air pressed against your wings. That's a part of understanding what his world is like. It's joyful. How marvelous that we can even have such thoughts. I don't think he can. I maintain that this is a different sort of beauty. It's beyond pretty. It's the kind of beauty created by the precise interlocking of thousands of details, most of them invisible to us, that makes possible this sort of an aerial ballet. Most incredible, this is a biological machine that runs on sunlight, just like us. It's built of many thousands of parts. Everything is connected to every other thing, and this gorgeous creature is but one of the great tapestry, just like us. And I have one more thing to share. For the last several years, I've done concerts with the Blackberry Winter Band. That's an Ozark band who provided much of the music for the movie Winter's Bone with its 4 Academy Awards. I know it sounds odd, my doing a concert, particularly a bluegrass type concert, because I play French horn. And very poorly. But in my doing a concert with them, my role is to fill a theater-sized screen behind them with images enhance the music that they make. And it's done live, so I have to be on my toes. Bo Brown, who you saw before this guy, called me up one time, says, do you have any photographs of a canyon wren? I said, I did. Well, I've got a pretty neat song, he said. See what you think. This is the canyon wren song. Ready to go?
Fly to the sun, take my remains where the wild waters run, scatter them there, the clear desert air, where the bright angel falls. There's times when my spirit, weary and worn, longs for the peace of a clear canyon morn. Rise from my sleep, dreamless and deep, in the canyon wren song. I live out my days in the ancient one's ways, dancing on ledges, riding on waves, listening to voices their laughter, cry with their tears. Of a clear canyon morn, rise from my sleep, dreamless and deep, to the canyon wren song, and live out my days in the ancient one's ways, dancing on ledges, riding on waves, listening to voices through thousands of years. Laugh with their laughter, cry with their tears.
What I loved about this song, and what makes it fit here, is the immersion of the storyteller into the landscape and his joy at becoming one with the ethos of the place and with the people who live there. To me, this song is about belonging. Belonging in a time when we didn't imagine ourselves to be masters of the world. What do you think? Floor is open to questions, I guess, or not. Okay.
Any questions?
Wow, I answered all of them.
Yeah,
Here's
you covered it all, man.
Here's what.
In my science feed today, I saw an article published at PNAS where they did brain scans of arthropods and found out that, or make the argument that a lot of insects now have consciousness. And I was wondering your thoughts on that and if consciousness is important.
Nah. Well, I tell you, I read that article. Well, actually, I read an editorial about that article. And according to them, as I recall, the midbrain of ants carries a far higher density of neurons than we do in our cortex. And you have to wonder what they're doing with that. And the answer is, I have no idea. But the business of consciousness is such an incredible puzzle. I mean, you aren't, and then you are, and then you're not. And nothing seems to change. It's incredible. I can't touch on it even with humans, and so not ants. So I can understand why it would be a limited consciousness would be selectively advantageous. But that's so far out of what I even think I know that I'll sidestep it.
Any other questions?
Great question. Yeah.
Can you just tell us what some of those last pictures were of?
Well, I was an artist in residence at Mesa Verde for 2 weeks. My wife and I spent 2 wonderful weeks out there. And my job was just to interpret the place. It's great. It gave me a nice place to stay in a Hogan. Gave me keys to the restricted sites. The last pictures were prayer. There's a word for that, and I'm not getting it. Prayer stick. And we found that in one of the off-site villages under the overhang that you're familiar with at Mesa Verde. It was obviously long abandoned, and people didn't go there much. But somebody had been there recently and driven that in the way that you might leave flowers at a grave. I think that's the intent of it. And those are the pictures you're referring to, right? Yeah.
Anyone else?
Back here.
Oh.
Sir, do you have a good illustration of the fact that evolution isn't driven to perfection, but to good enough? It would help me in some conversations.
Okay.
Have a good one.
That's a great question, because as I was whittling down the minutes so I could squeeze it into this time, I threw out some things. And one of the things I said in here was that we are all at the peak of our perfection. Actually, we're not. We were at the peak of our perfection for the environment a year ago, or a half a generation ago. Makes a big difference to ants. I mean, all of us are tuned to what was. And as the environment changes, we're not perfect for it anymore. We'll get there, but unfortunately, by the time we get there, it will have changed again. So there's a certain nastiness to this whole business. There is no drive for perfection. There's just a drive to reproduce. If you do something that enhances your probability of having more offspring, or of your tribe having more offspring compared to the tribe across the valley, that will be selected for. And if you do this for 3.5 billion years, you get all kinds of stuff. And some of it is just amazing. I mean, it's so amazing. The turkey vulture, for instance. What in the world? I mean, we got all kinds of stuff too. We got dung beetles. We got, oh man. But don't get me started. Does that get you where you want to be?
They didn't need it.
The last sentence, please. I couldn't quite hear.
I was looking for an example of this that I could use in conversation as an example of they went to what was good for this environment, but they kept with them things from the past that they don't need now.
Well, let's see. Wisdom teeth come to mind. My aching back comes to mind. Just, for starters, we're evolved for this and that. My vagus nerve does the most bizarre stuff. It comes out, it's a 5th cranial nerve, so it comes out here. And in fish, it used to go down the throat through the gill arches and supply those. Well, our gill arches have moved south, and so our vagus nerve now goes down here and then comes back up and innervates the throat. It allows for things like hiccups. You get some wad stuffed in your esophagus, and it pinches, and the vagus nerve is likely to get aggravated one way or another. There are just endless examples. Hope that does the job. Anybody else?
So my question is about the turkey vultures in particular. I know that you mentioned that they sterilize like various diseases. The question is, do they actually, are they susceptible to any diseases that we're not, and do they actually die of diseases in this particular case?
I would expect the answer to that is yes. I don't know what it would be, but it wouldn't be anything they would intake in a dietary form. They could pick up a sneeze from a neighboring vulture, I guess, and it would bypass that whole business. But their liver is 25% of their body weight.
Okay.
And with a bird that flies, that's a big deal. So they run, I mean, everything that goes in the GI tract goes through the portal system, goes through the liver, and gets detoxed. That's the plan.
So the follow-up on that is, have we like attempted to utilize turkey vultures in ways that we can like actually destroy diseases in this particular case? Is there any possible way that we can work on that? And my next thing is like, I'm thinking, you know, in the event of a zombie apocalypse, I would keep a turkey vulture around because, you know, hey.
You could wash your feet. Well, the answer is yes and no. I mean, people are asking these questions. But nobody, for instance, it takes 115 degrees to kill an anthrax spore. And they do it internally with, you know, none of that. So people would like to know how it is that they do it, but nobody knows. The use that we've made of them is that they smell certain particular compounds that are associated with decomposition. And one of those is the scent that we put in natural gas. And so they tend to accumulate around leaks in natural gas lines. So natural gas companies can travel the pipelines and look for leaks just by looking for vultures. It's not as good as curing anthrax, you know, but up there.
Thank you so much, John.
Yeah.
Everybody give John a big round of applause. That was
Thank you.
Absolutely fantastic presentation.